Let me ask you this. How many of you have ever assumed something about someone? You assumed something about someone, right? Maybe it was, maybe you had a friend and you knew something about them that they did was wrong or whatever it may be. And you assume that, man, if I talk to them about this or bring it up, they're not going to react well. So I might as well not even bring it up to them in the first place. Anybody ever been there? Yeah, several of you, right? Or maybe you saw a guy or a girl, right? They're hanging out together at school or at the park or something like that. And you thought they were actually dating. And they turned out to be brother and sister. And you're like, oh, that's weird. Like, right? Like, listen, in ministry, I'm meeting people constantly. I have learned the hard way. And sometimes, like a brother and sister walk in and it's like, oh man, how long have you guys been together? Oh, it was like, they're like, nah, bro, we're siblings. Yeah, it's happened before. Hey, even when I first got to South Point, I had to make sure that I adjusted my language in terms of like asking, because sometimes like I'm new here and I'm seeing people that I've never seen before, or at least within the first few weeks. So I'm assuming they're a first-time guest. And I was like, oh man, is this like your first time? They're like, oh no, I've actually been coming here for a decade. Oh, right? Like the way we assume can often backfire on us, right? There's power in the assumptions that we make. There's power in the assumptions that can lead us to often putting inaccurate labels on people and even ourselves. Assumptions can lead to us self-sabotaging friendships and relationships in our lives. Assumptions can lead to the avoidance of conversations. Assumptions can lead to us isolating ourselves even when we have a great community around us. Assumptions can be powerful, and if it's not the right assumption, it can actually be potentially damaging for us. I want to talk about tonight, and the title of my message is Stop Assuming and Know. Stop assuming and know. One of the most powerful quotes that I always reflect on is a quote from A.W. Tozer, and he states this: what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. What comes to our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Why? Because what we think about God will either allow us to reveal the areas of discomfort, right, to him, or it will lead us to hide from him. What we think about God is either drawing us closer to him or creating distance from him. And I want to dive into this because a lot of times we assume the wrong things about God and sometimes don't assume the right things about him. And it puts us in these difficult situations where some of us are frustrated about God because we assume that he was supposed to do this if we did this, and that was never a promise or in alignment with his character in the first place. And so we find ourselves sometimes in these tensions that making assumptions about God that are not correct, and then sometimes making assumptions about God, or not making assumptions about God, knowing who he is and his character. There's power in assumptions, right? But I want to challenge us to stop assuming just the things about God and actually know God. Because as Tozer states, what comes to our minds when we think about who God is the most important thing about us. This is important. This, where your self-worth comes from, tags along with how you view God. Your identity and who you are is directly correlated to how you view God. And so I'm hoping that tonight, that this is a big topic and I'm not going to be able to cover everything, but I'm hoping that maybe as we're talking about identifying the discomfort, the pain of our past, the sin that we're struggling with, the areas that maybe we have hid from God, that maybe we could start assuming the right things about who God is. Are y'all with me tonight? Are y'all ready? Yeah, look at your neighbor, say, yeah. Here we go. It gets me every time we all do the accent. All right, here we go. I want to give you two thoughts tonight. The first thought is this. What we see is not always what God sees. What we see is not always or equates to what God sees. Let me give you an example. If I was to sit down with the NFL quarterback, and if we were to watch an NFL football game, both of us can be sitting on the same couch in the same room watching the same live game, but yet what we're seeing on the TV is completely different, right? Because I'm not an NFL quarterback. If I'm hanging out with Tom Brady's gonna be like, yeah, the defense is in cover 2. This person's gonna slide in right here, and I'm gonna be like, I did not see that happening, right? We're in the same room, seeing the same things, or watching the same thing, but yet we see it differently. It would be like if I was to go and hang out with, somebody who's a famous musician, and they're playing, and we go listen to, I don't know, what we got? Who we got? What are y'all listening to now these days? Okay, see, I am out of touch with, I don't know any of the things. Let's go, a Little Big Mac. I just I don't even know who that is. But watch it not be a great artist, and this goes on YouTube. All right. But imagine if I sit with somebody who is at a high level in understanding music theory and is able to pick out the different sounds that are happening. We can listen and be in the same environment, listen to the same band, listen to the same orchestra, but in what we're being able to hear, the person who knows music is gonna be able to decipher very differently than what I am able to. We're at the same place, listening to the same things, but yet we're seeing and we're hearing a little bit differently. See, if we can put the image on the screen, this actually says a word. Now, when you look at it, many of you are like, bro, this is the most chaotic thing, right? It just looks like a bunch of squiggly lines, somewhat of a tree, right? But it actually spells a word. Does anybody want to take a shot? Who knows? You can't even get the first letter. See, it spells a word, right? And ultimately, I'll share with you, ready? The word that's spelled on here is actually Jesus, right? But when we look at it, we see very different things. A bunch of you are seeing nothing. You're like, bro, this is just a blur. This ain't really my field. Thank you for telling me, because that was gonna keep me up all night, right? And we can switch to the next, or take that off the slide. But we see different things. Some of us just saw a bunch of squiggly lines, but actually there was a word that was on there, and that word was Jesus. See, it's in the same way that when we sit with God, imagine sitting with God, right? And looking at the areas in your life that you feel like have caused you pain, discomfort, frustration, and the areas in your life where you feel like you have needed to hide. Sitting with God, you say, this is something I can't come back from. This is something that's shameful. I can't see it. But God, sitting on the other side of you, looking at the same thing that you're looking at, says something different. Says something different. See, we can look at the different areas in our life and say, this is going to be forever broken. But yet, where God sees the same thing, he says, I can restore. Sees the same thing, but yet sees it differently. See, 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9, we covered it last week. Jesus states to Paul that my grace is sufficient. And so this is so important for us when we talk about understanding that what we see is not always what God sees, because a lot of times we're harping on ourselves of like, man, I can't show this. I can't talk about this with God. I can't even show this side of me, and acting like God's not already aware, omnipresent, omnipotent. But he sees it, but doesn't see something that is forever fractured or broken, but actually sees restoration as a possibility. Are y'all following me tonight? So, thank you. See, when you feel like there is no point of return and you're bogged down by shame, Jesus says, my grace is sufficient. See, Romans 8, chapter 8, verse 38, Paul writes, for I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor demons, neither present, nor the future, nor any powers, no height, no depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. See, the right assumption, that we need to have about God is that there is nothing that you could ever do or would ever do that would stop God from loving you. It doesn't change. It's agape, meaning unconditional. Now, you can do things that can remove yourself from the covering of that love, but it's not that God's love ever changes. It just, you have changed, right? But what we need to know about God's character and what's so important is that we need to have the right assumption, knowing that his love will never change for you. His love is greater than your shame. His love is greater than your pain. Didn't mean to rhyme right there, but it worked. So when we bring the hidden areas of our heart to God, we may see something that is broken beyond repair, but out of God's great love for us, he sees the area in our life and he sees something that is able to be restored, something that he is able to redeem. To reference 2 Corinthians 12:9 again, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness so that Christ's power may rest on me. What we see is not always what God sees. And what you have labeled as fractured, as something that's beyond repair, God says, no, I can still do a miracle. Listen, God that we see in the New Testament, the Old Testament, that does all these amazing things, guess what? In Hebrews, the author reminds us that our God, Jesus Christ, is the same yesterday, today, and what? Forever. What we see is not always what God sees. We must stop assuming and just know who our God is. Second thought is this: God does not get tired of hearing you and does not get tired of moving on your behalf. God does not get tired of hearing you and he does not get tired of moving on your behalf. How many of you have people that you know that they just continue to talk and you're like, bro, stop. In your mind, you're like, shut up, no more, we're done, please. And you're too nice to say it out loud, you're just thinking it in your mind, right? Or maybe it's that person that they always are complaining about the same exact thing. And you told them, if you do this, this won't happen. It's like probably like your small group leader trying to tell this to you, right? No, I'm just kidding, maybe not. But right? But you tell this to your friend, if you stop doing this, this will be a better outcome. But they keep complaining about it because they keep doing the same thing and they keep talking about it over and over. How many of you know that person, right? How many of you probably are that person? Okay, here we go. Yeah, much more hands for the second one, right? And see, here's the thing. Wherever we fall on the side, whether we're the person that's always like talking or complaining, or maybe we're the person that's always listening, and we're like, bro, please. See, here's the thing we need to know about God is that he never gets tired of you. Some of us have stopped praying prayers because we think we are annoying God. We've stopped sharing some of the deep areas of our life because we think God is tired of us sounding like a broken record. Can I just remind you that God is outside of just the human emotion and human tolerance? Can I remind you that it was out of God's great love for you, John 3:16, that he would send his son Jesus, who would be fully God, fully man, and would die for you. And we can look all throughout Jesus' life and pick out many times where we're like, bro, I would have just left and just said, you're done, just like start whooping them, right? But he doesn't. And can I tell you why? Here's what you need to know about your God, that he doesn't get tired of you. Some of you are like, you stop bringing pain and some of those areas that were sin that are in your life because you just thought this was going to be a forever thing and that God is just tired of it and that he'll never really care enough, and that's not the truth. But the reality is that he never gets tired of you. See, in Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah in chapter 40, verse 28 through 31, Isaiah the prophet says this: do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired. Come on, somebody say he won't grow tired. Come on, look at your neighbor, say he won't grow tired. He won't grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases power to the weak. Even youths, us, grow weary and tired, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord, he will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. This is such a beautiful reminder for us to know about who God is. So many beautiful reminders, knowing that God, we see here in this passage, doesn't get tired. We see here God has great understanding that is out bigger than the smartest person that you think you know. And he recognizes that we are weak. That's the tough reality. We are weak. And I know that's tough for some of us to hear, but our flesh seems to always fail on us. Where, Paul even writes, someone who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, writes, and he's talking and kind of get this glimpse of what his prayer life looks like with God. It's like, God, I know what I want to do, but yet I keep doing what I don't want to keep doing. And this is where even Paul, someone who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, helped pioneer the church. If he is proclaiming his weakness before the Lord, so should we. If he's acknowledged that his need for dependency on God and his strength, so should we. And can I just take a moment and have us just take a step back? What a good God. What a good God that recognizes that we are weak, but says those who call upon the name of the Lord, he will renew their strength. What a good God that says, I don't grow tired of hearing you. What a great God that is not limited by not needing sleep or anything like that, and is always omnipresent, meaning he's always there, always with you, and is always ready to hear you. What a great thing to know about our God, that he never gets tired of us. Now, some of you, you're like, Josh, it's the same sin that I'm struggling with. It's the same pain. It's the same past experience. And I know God's has to be tired of hearing that. He won't move on my behalf in this particular area, but he will. See, here's what we must know about God and what we must hold on to. And this is why it's important. Can I tell you, you're never going to outgrow a place in your life where you're not going to hear someone say, read your Bible. Because here's the thing, a lot of times the wrong assumptions that we have about God or not knowing who he truly is out of us not being literate and understanding what his word says and taking the time to read. But check out what Isaiah says. This is something, a promise that we can hold on to about God's character. But those who hope, and in another translation, but those who call on the Lord, he will renew their strength. What a good God. God does not get tired of hearing you, and he does not get tired of moving on your behalf. It's just you having to take the step and call upon his name. It's just you taking the step saying, I'm tired of hiding things that have been in my life, but I'm gonna bring it before you, God, and I'm gonna hold you to your word, and I'm gonna ask you to move on my behalf. I'm weak, and guess what? I need that strength that you're talking about. I need my strength to be renewed. I wanna be able to latch a hold of this imagery of being able to mount up on wings like eagles. Like, I want that. So hold him to it. God does not get tired of hearing you, and he doesn't get tired of moving on your behalf. Stop assuming and know. And Nicole, you can come up here. In Matthew chapter 25, where we started tonight, let's review it again. Remember, this is the guy who's having a conversation with his master in the parable that Jesus is giving here. And we're seeing the guy kind of trying to make excuses for why he didn't maximize what was put in his hand. And so let's read it again. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man. Pause. If nothing was said about the master being a harsh man, nothing, the other two didn't know, they didn't walk with this assumption. So there wasn't this overall general clarity that the master was harsh in this story, but yet the man had perceived that the master was. He said, I knew that you are a harsh man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid. There we go. He was afraid, and he went out and hid the gold. Can I tell you, us having the wrong assumption about who God is can leave us not being able to maximize the life that we have here on earth. Because you know what Jesus says about the master and what he said to the servant? Because ultimately, right, this is a parallel, the master being Jesus, and ultimately the other 3 servants are humanity. You know what he told the other 2 that maximized what they had in their hand? He said, well done, my good and faithful servant. Now, the story with this guy that didn't do anything with it doesn't end good. He gets upset. The master is upset, frustrated. But you see, this man did not receive a well done, good and faithful servant because he had the wrong assumption of his master. And my hope for you is that you wouldn't go through this life holding on to just the sin and pain and different things in your life and just going through where because you just assume that God didn't care. You just assume that God would get tired of hearing you. You just assume that God would just see what you see and it's just broken and that it's no hope in any restoration. See, it was because the man had this perception that he was a hard man, that he didn't do anything with what was placed in his hand. Can I tell you, there is an invitation for us tonight to stop assuming and actually know the heart of God. Know that he is a good God. Know that what we see is not always what God sees. Know that God does not get tired of hearing us and that he does not get tired of moving on our behalf. Can I encourage you, don't miss out on experiencing the goodness of God because you had the wrong assumption of him. God is good. And I would encourage you, just these 2 simple truths. This is just kind of a stepping stone of encouragement for you to hopefully launch you in to learn a little bit more about the God that you follow and that the word that you can hold him to. But I'm hoping that you wouldn't go throughout your life just being in discomfort and not bringing things before God and settling for hiding sin, hiding pain, not addressing things in your life because you have the wrong assumption of who God is. Where God, the whole time, what the prophet Isaiah says is that he's waiting for you to call. upon his name.